true holiday party horror stories you won't believe. This is Mr. H. You're listening to Masked Horror. The Secret Upstairs. I heard this story from good friends of mine, Sarah and Mike, after they moved into our area. We were sitting around one night, swapping tales about strange experiences. When they finally opened up, it took years of friendship for them to share this truth. When Sarah and Mike told me about what happened that night, I didn't know what to think. They had moved into a tight-knit, religious community not long before they moved to our community. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other, where potlucks and holiday parties were the norm. They'd been invited to a Christmas party at the Johnsons', a family everyone seemed to admire. At first, it seemed like an innocent holiday party, a cozy gathering at the Johnsons' newly renovated historic home. Everyone in their religious community looked up to the Johnsons. Sarah and Mike had just moved into the neighborhood, and they were eager to make friends. They heard the Johnsons were kind, generous, and had a way of making you feel welcome, even when you weren't sure you belonged. So they were excited to attend the holiday party. The house was gorgeous, with its polished wood floors, ornate chandeliers, and the kind of timeless charm you only find in old homes. The Johnsons gave a tour, showing off every corner of their renovations, except the upstairs. When someone asked about it, they laughed it off, saying it was just storage, and moved on quickly. Sarah said she thought nothing of it at the time, but looking back, she remembered how their laughter felt forced. Later in the evening, Sarah excused herself to find the restroom. She ended up wandering upstairs, more curious than she realized. The staircase creaked under her feet as she ascended into the dimly lit hallway. That's when she saw the door. It was old, with chipped paint, a rusted handle, and a padlock, a stark contrast to the rest of the beautifully renovated home. Then she heard it, faint crying. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the sound grew clearer, muffled sobbing, whispers, and heavy breathing. The hairs on her neck stood up. She leaned closer, straining to hear. Then came a slapping sound, followed by frantic shuffling, like someone scrambling to move or hide. Before she could do anything, the host, Mr. Johnson, appeared out of nowhere. He was pale, his smile too wide and unnatural. He stepped in front of her, blocking her from the door. "You're curious, aren't you?" he whispered, his voice low and unsettling. "I would love to show you what's behind the door, but maybe another time. How does that sound?" Before she could answer, he placed his hand on her lower back and leaned in close. "Why don't you rejoin the party?" he whispered in her ear. Sarah was too startled to argue. She hurried back downstairs, avoiding Mike and anyone else. She didn't tell him what happened until they got home. While out to lunch with some other women in the community, that's when Sarah learned the truth. Women in the community began whispering about past gatherings at the Johnsons', how some felt uncomfortable around Mr. Johnson, how others had seen or heard things they couldn't explain. One woman even claimed she had seen the same locked door years earlier, but never dared to ask about it. Apparently, they were into some weird adult activities, things you could only imagine in your wildest dreams. Salacious is a word you could use. Rumors hinted at disturbing activities involving the locked door. Sarah and Mike were torn and didn't want to ruffle any feathers. Ultimately, they decided to keep what happened to themselves, and they shortly moved after. I still wonder about that room, about the Johnsons, and about the people who stayed silent. There's a part of me that tells myself it's none of my business. What people do in the privacy of their own home is their choice after all. But deep down, I guess I'm just nosy and want to know what really went on behind those locked doors. It's unsettling to think about how much we hide from each other, the masks we wear to blend in, to be accepted. The real question is, which mask is the true one? The friendly neighbor, the gracious host, or the person who smiles a little too wide when you get too close to the truth? Maybe the scariest part isn't what's behind the locked door, but the realization that we may never truly know the people around us or what their intentions really are. The dangerous party crasher. I'll never forget the night of our neighbor's annual holiday party. It was one of those perfect suburban scenes. Twinkling lights, cheerful music, and the smell of drinks and joy wafting through the air. Everyone was in a good mood, especially when Santa arrived. He was tall, with a jolly laugh and a big, convincing costume. He claimed to be a friend of the host neighbor and fit in effortlessly. He took selfies with the kids, handed out candy canes, and charmed the adults with his quick wit. No one questioned his presence. Why would they? He was Santa Claus at a Christmas party. What could be more harmless? I remember thinking he was a little too friendly. At one point, I caught him standing by the coat rack, rummaging through what I thought was his bag. I brushed it off, assuming he was grabbing a candy cane or something. Later, I realized how wrong I was. The party was in full swing when one of the guests, Amanda, started looking for her purse. She thought she'd left it on the kitchen counter, but couldn't find it. Soon, another woman mentioned her wallet was missing, and someone else couldn't locate their phone. That's when the host, Greg, got suspicious. He approached Santa, who was lounging near the fireplace with a drink in hand, and asked if he had seen anything. Santa's reaction was strange. He laughed, a deep, booming laugh, but didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, adjusted his hat, and said, "Well, it's been fun, but I should be going." Before Greg could press him further, Santa walked out the back door. Greg followed, but by the time he reached the driveway, the man had disappeared. That's when we noticed it. 3 cars were missing. Panic spread through the party as people began checking their keys. I ran to where I'd left my coat, only to find my car keys gone too. Greg called the police while the rest of us stood there stunned. It turned out Santa wasn't a friend of anyone. He was a professional thief who had been targeting holiday parties in the area for weeks. By the time the police arrived, he was long gone. The stolen cars were later found abandoned, but none of the wallets, purses, or phones were ever recovered. What haunts me the most isn't the loss of my things, it's how easily he tricked us. He didn't break in or force his way inside. He walked through the front door, smiled, and made us believe he belonged. The thought still sends chills down my spine. Because really, how many strangers do we let into our lives without questioning? What other Santas might be lurking out there, waiting for their chance to strike? Eggnog, or something more. It started as one of those perfect holiday gatherings, warm lights, laughter, and the smell of baked cookies filling the air. The kind of party where everyone knew each other, where you'd expect nothing but harmless fun. This year, the highlight was a homemade eggnog brought by a guy named Travis. He wasn't exactly a close friend of mine, more of a friend, but he fit right in. Travis was the kind of guy who always wanted to be the life of the party. When he showed up with his own festive punch bowl of eggnog, people were excited. "It's my grandma's secret recipe," he bragged, pouring ladles of the creamy drink into mugs. I'll admit, it was delicious, thick, sweet, and with just the right kick of rum. At first, everything seemed fine. People mingled, and the eggnog became a hit. But about an hour in, things started to feel off. I noticed one of the neighbors, Nancy, laughing hysterically, almost like she couldn't stop. Then another guest, Tom, who's usually quiet, was slurring his words and stumbling into furniture. That's when I felt it myself. A strange lightheadedness washed over me, almost like I was drunk, but I'd only had 1 cup of eggnog. My hands trembled and my heart was racing. Across the room, another guest, Sarah, a nurse, was sitting with her head in her hands. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice shaky. Her words cut through the room like a knife. That's when we realized this wasn't just alcohol. People were crying, some couldn't stop laughing, and others, like Greg, were slumped in chairs, barely able to keep their eyes open. Then there were those like me, wired, jittery, and feeling like I'd downed 5 cups of coffee in a single gulp. Sarah called 911, and within minutes, paramedics were at the door. They moved quickly, taking vitals and pulling out stretchers. One paramedic mentioned mixed symptoms and suggested we've been drugged. That's when Travis, the guy who brought the eggnog, started laughing nervously. I just wanted to liven things up," he stammered. When pressed, he admitted to spiking the eggnog with a small amount of THC. "I thought it'd be funny," he said, like this was some kind of sick joke. It definitely wasn't a small amount. "Funny, tell that to Nancy, who passed out and had to be carried to the ambulance, or Tommy, who later told me his heart felt like it was going to explode." The aftermath was pure chaos. 4 people were rushed to the hospital, and the festive mood of the evening was shattered. Since Travis was, for lack of a better term, a friend, we ultimately decided not to press charges, though some of us were hesitant, myself included. Still, I'll admit, I walked away from that night with a hard-earned lesson I won't soon forget. What still bothers me, though, is how close we all came to trusting someone we barely knew. One person's idea of a prank turned a joyful holiday gathering into a nightmare. And the scariest part? It could have been anyone at any party.